Welcome to Orbicle Times Podcast, and hello to everyone, whatever part of the globe you're from or happen to reside in. My name is Kelly Jo, and here we'll provide armchair conversations gathered from interviews and research reviews to explore the seen, the unseen, and the in-between of the supernatural paranormal phenomena, with topics that circle around Spirit Orbs, NDEs, OBEs, UFOs, time slips, mystical moments, higher consciousness, and more. I hope that this cast will be our meeting place and judge-free zone where we can explore, learn, and grow through the telling of. This cast will be launched on a monthly basis or a bi-weekly schedule whenever I'm able to make contact with those in the know for their telling of. Speaking of those in the know and the telling of, have you had mystical moments or other supernatural paranormal experiences? Care to share on this cast? Then consider stepping into the light with your telling of, or send in your monologue for me to read on this podcast. Simply email orbicletimespodcast@gmail.com for a chance to contribute to this cast.
The fire guard who's down there, and he was there, and in the dark when he was patrolling, he saw these bright red eyes glaring at him in the dark. He calls up to the cage operator and says, "Get me out of here now." And he says, "Why?" He's like, "There's something down here. I need out of here now." So think about the 15 minutes he had to wait for the cage to come and get him. And he said, "There's something down there. I'm never going back." And he never did.
In this episode of Orbicle Times, we are pursuing and perusing paranormal pages with writer, author, co-author, bookseller, podcaster, just a sprinkle of some of his accolades, fellow Canadian Mark Leslie. We'll be circling around publishing practices, touching on the subject of AI, and sampling some of his non-fiction paranormal books, with my abbreviated, his alliterated, titles such as Haunted Hamilton, The Ghost of Dundurn Castle and Other Steel Town Shivers, Spooky Sudbury, Creepy Capital, Haunted Hospitals, Macabre Montreal, and his 2020 Too Macabre for Montreal. Mark has published more than 25 books that include thrillers, anthologies, and self-help books for those in need of navigating the publishing world, and of course, the topic up for this discussion, his non-fiction paranormal books. And so, without further ado, let's get on with this interview. A warm welcome to you, monsieur, and it's so kind of you to carve out some time in your very demanding schedule. So I very much appreciate that, Mark.
Thank you so much. This is the time of year for us to be carving pumpkins and getting ready to celebrate the best month of the year, Halloween. I mean, October.
Is that your favorite month? I think it is.
Oh my God, October is the best month of the year because it's Halloween, right? And I just get so excited because this is the time of year when everyone thinks the way I think all year.
So they're right in line with your thinking then. They've caught up to you, Mark.
I fit in October, apparently.
Or everybody else fits in with you. I hope we can explore at least two of your paranormal books, and that would be the Creepy Capital Ghost Stories of Ottawa and the National Capital Region, plus Macabre Montreal. But first, Mark, I'm wondering, can you recall the person or the circumstance that first inspired you to write, or depending on how old you are, Mark, perhaps print stories? And by printing, I'm talking about pencil era.
Yeah. You know what's really funny is I had a lot of great teachers growing up. Mr. Roberts, who was also the librarian, he was our English teacher when we were in public school, very small school. So we had the same teachers almost every grade that taught different subjects, or you had teachers, and then as you got a little bit older, they just taught the subjects. And he would read to us in the library. There would be a session where you would actually go to the library once a week.
Yeah.
And he was such a good orator, like an oral storyteller. And he read to us in the library when we were younger, and then when I had him in grade 7 and 8, it was the same part of the same school. He read the chrysalids to us, and he read John Christopher science fiction, the tripod novels to us, like one day of the week, like Fridays or something. And he had a British accent, and it was magnificent. So
always helps.
I remember writing a story in grade 9 in high school English about nuclear war. I was terrified about the prospects of what could happen.
Yeah.
And I remember bringing it to Mr. Roberts to get his critique on it. He wasn't my teacher anymore, but he was my friend's dad. And I remember getting a really great critique from him. And he called out some things he liked about it, and he advised me on things I should fix, which was fantastic. He was very patient with me, which I loved. So there were teachers like that, but I was always fascinated with the macabre. I was even drawing, especially Halloween time, drawing pictures of Sasquatch and ghosts and goblins and stuff, and I was just very fascinated with that. And I did start printing stories. I think it was maybe in grade 5 or grade 6 when I started to really when writing fiction really took hold. I didn't really enjoy nonfiction until my adult years. I mean, Haunted Hamilton was my first foray into nonfiction. And I was quite adult at that point, at least age-wise, not maturity-wise. And that was inspired from going on ghost walks. I actually went on ghost walk in Ottawa in the
Yeah.
90s, and that was when I first discovered the thrill of history could actually be interesting. I hated history. I was miserable at history. I barely passed history in high school. And it wasn't until I went on that first ghost walk on Ottawa, downtown Ottawa, learned about the fascinating historical elements and ghosts and stuff. And I went, whoa, we actually have a fascinating, I mean, we have a pretty macabre history if you look at it, but there's some really fascinating elements of our history that you can tell using ghost stories. When I first moved to Hamilton, one of the first things I did, because that was a city that my wife at the time was from, I didn't know it. She'd grown up in the city. And so I went on the ghost walks because I wanted to acquaint myself with the city. And that was one of the great ways to learn about the city, which of course led to the book Haunted Hamilton. So yeah, I was just always fascinated with story, always fascinated with writing. Mostly it was fiction when I was a kid, and I was mostly intrigued with UFOs and monsters and Bigfoot and things that couldn't be explained, and wanting to write what if there was a monster in the sewer, what if the monster under my bed was real. Always drawn to the shadows.
I wonder why.
Have long been a chicken. I am still scared of the dark at the age of 54. I was constantly I would jump into bed when I came back to bed after going to the washroom in the middle of the night because I didn't want the monster under the bed to reach and grab my legs. I made sure the closet door was closed so the monster in the closet couldn't come out and get me. Running up the stairs, I had to boot it up the stairs because either the monster coming up behind me was going to grab me or the one would reach between the risers and grab my feet. So I did the best I could to not have my feet touch the ground as little as possible as I was running up the stairs. And I'm still that way as an adult. When my son was born, and he's 19 now, but I was afraid. I was terrified he was going to come into the room and say, Dad, there's a boogeyman in my room. And I couldn't tell him the boogeyman wasn't real because I was scared of the boogeyman too. So we did do something for him when he was a kid. We made him make a sign that said no monsters allowed, and we put it on his door. And of course, he went to bed, and then I wrote a story about a kid doing that, but it actually had really bad repercussions because no monsters were allowed in his room, but they were allowed everywhere else in the house. Still an unpublished horror story that I wrote called No Monsters Allowed from the kid's perspective.
It's still there in the drawer.
It's in the drawer. I have this sort of idea in the back of my head that I'm gonna take some of my more young adult themed stories, and that would be the lead story in a collection called No Monsters Allowed. So again, most of my imagination always looked in the dark and saw something there. And so that's where the stories came from. And so when it came to researching ghosts and stuff like that, I approach the books that I've written, and these 6 books that I've written for Dundurn are all like nonfiction, true ghost stories or real hauntings. Now I approach it with a skeptic's mind because I am looking for what a logical explanation might be. But I love when we can't figure out what the logical explanation might be. And I'll give you a perfect example. In my Tomes of Terror, which is haunted bookstores and libraries, and I've worked in bookstores most of my life, sometimes people go, and the books fell off the shelves all by themselves. I'm like, okay, all right. So there are some physics factors that come into play. For example, the door opens, the wind pressure changes. That'll sometimes, knock a book over. But also, especially where we live in this part of Ontario and Canada, in the summertime, it gets really humid. and paper absorbs moisture. And so if you see mass markets on the shelf by the end of August, sometimes that expansion, there's just incremental, and then they just drop off the shelf. And so you'll see books flopping off the shelf all the time in the middle of the humid summer. Having experienced that, I'm like, yeah, I don't think books just falling off the shelf are paranormal. Like it's kind of
No.
creepy, but it can probably be explained. Now, one of the stories I researched was a bunch of Goosebumps titles where the person walked through the kids section into the back room, came back 30 seconds later, all the Goosebumps books that were on the shelf were piled perfectly up in a stack about a foot high in the middle of the floor, away from the shelf. So they couldn't have just fallen into that position. Something very quickly moved them there. That was not visible to anyone. That's unexplainable, but books falling off the shelf aren't.
Interesting how you're not, what I'm going to say, a seasoned experiencer of the paranormal, and maybe perhaps glad of it, but that you decided to write, several books on the topic.
No, my first haunted walk was with the Ghost Walk group in Ottawa. And then my very second one was when I moved to Hamilton. It's one of the first things I did when I moved to Hamilton was go on the walk. And Haunted Hamilton was my first book, though.
What was it that encouraged you to go on this walk at night?
Even when I returned, so I was living in Ottawa at the time in the early 90s when I went on that first ghost walk, moved to Hamilton in the mid 90s, late 90s, returned to Ottawa for doing research with Creepy Capital. And I remember going with my partner, and she's a non-believer, but she wanted to see a ghost. And so when we were on the tour that takes you through the haunted jail, Carleton Jail, she kept sneaking off to go by herself because she wanted to see something spooky, and she felt like there were too many people around. And I was terrified to go sneak off anyway. And she said, "Oh my God, we could stay here. We could stay overnight in a haunted jail." I'm like, no, you can stay overnight in a haunted jail. I'll be at the Novotel across the street with all the lights on. Yeah, I will go on these adventures, but only with flashlights and safety, apparently, because I'm still a big chicken, and I've only experienced a couple unexplainable paranormal phenomena myself, and it was only until like just last sort of a half dozen years. But prior to that, people would say, "Have you ever seen a ghost?" I'm like, "No, thank God, because I'd probably have a heart attack."
Now, I've been on that walk as well, the one in Ottawa. When you went on that walk, did anything happen to you or your partner, or even in the group when you went on that haunted walk of the Carleton County Jail?
No, but we've heard, and I've gone on that haunted walk the 3 times now, and I
Wow.
encourage, if this is going to be out before the end of December 2023, I encourage listeners, if you have not had a chance, go on their haunted walks of the jail, because the jail's not going to be allowing them in after December 31st.
No, I didn't know that. This will be
Yeah.
out in October. Change of guard?
It's a change of guard. So it shut down over the pandemic. A new company took over, and I think the new
Yes.
company wants to use the floors that they do the tours on. They actually want to convert them into spaces where people can stay, which means bringing tours through there would be very disruptive.
Oh, wow.
So obviously it's a business move, right? They probably would make more money renting the rooms than what the Ghost Walk team pays to come on tours there.
Do I have this right? Around 2012, you were at a industry meeting where you overheard, I guess was the publisher, Dunder Press, mention that they would like to one day do a ghost story or a series, so that you approached them. It sounds like that the stars aligned for you. And
it's so funny because, one of the things I tell authors, if you want to pitch a book, is take a look at the market and say, is there room in the market for it? So when I looked at it, I said, okay, there's a Ghost Walk group in Hamilton, but there's never been a book of ghost stories about Hamilton. And I'd overheard the vice president of Dundurn at a meeting say, we've always wanted to do a book of ghost stories about Hamilton, because Dundurn Publishing, Kurt, the founder of Dundurn, now retired, had always loved Dundurn Castle, and that's what he named the publisher after. And of course, there's legends that Dundurn is haunted. So it's like, oh, they're interested in a book of ghost stories about Hamilton. There's never been a book of ghost stories about Hamilton. There is a market for a book of ghost stories about Hamilton. So that's my one-page letter pitched. And it kind of caught me off guard because it was the very first pitch I sent to a publisher that was successful. I had not written the book yet. I just said, hey, here's the market, here's the demographics, here's why it will be successful, and here's what I could write for you. And they came back and said, great, we actually have room in our fall calendar, because usually it's like 2 or 3 years out for a book. You can get this book to us in like 3 weeks or whatever it was.
Oh my
We'll put it
goodness.
in our fall catalog. And I went, oh my God, I have to write this book now. I booked a week off work, and I did nothing but research and work, which meant going to the library, spending time downtown archives. And I have to say, the librarians in the archive sections of the libraries are your best friend.
Yeah.
I just said what I was looking for, and they would bring me stacks of files and things you couldn't take out because they're old newspaper clippings and things.
Sure.
I would be able to make photocopies and then bring them home. And again, I bought some books, and I interviewed the folks from the Haunted Hamilton, and I took books out of the library, did all my research, got the manuscript in, and then something happened where I had to do a bunch of rewrites on the manuscript when I got it back from my developmental editor at Dundurn. I had to go get the books out of the library again, because one of the things I neglected to do was properly identify what page from the book. I just said, oh, I got information from this book, and they were like, no, you need to document what page you got it from and stuff. And I learned later on, even if the publisher doesn't use those footnotes, I need to have them myself.
Yeah.
Just to source that this was a quote from page 60.
Yeah, for reference purposes.
And you can't use ebooks for that, because there are no page numbers in ebooks
Right.
properly. You have to
Right.
use a physical book for that sort of denotation. But yeah, that was it was quite the event, because that led to a really great succession of me pitching the next book. Spooky Sudbury, I was being interviewed by a journalist in Sudbury, and she said, have you ever thought about writing a book of ghost stories about your hometown? I grew up just north of Sudbury. And I said, no. She said, well, if you ever want to, I've written some stories for the local newspaper that are haunted places. I'd love to work on one with you. I went, oh, cool. Let's meet for coffee next time I'm in town. Let's talk about it. Pitched it to Dundurn. They said, yeah, let's do it. And that's how a lot of them came about, was just these conversations with people. Haunted hospitals happened when I was at a conference in Calgary, and we were just drinking in the evening, and a fellow author turned to me and very conspiratorially whispered, I live near a haunted hospital. Tell me more. And then she told me, and then we started talking about haunted hospitals, and we said, hey, I think we got something here. Okay, how about in the morning? Let's meet up when we're sober, take some notes, and see if we have something here. And I looked at it, and then I looked at it, and I said, well, there are books on haunted hospitals, but Dundurn's never done one. So I pitched it to them, and of course they love that. And then Rhonda went on to write Haunted Edmonton for them, because that's the town that she lives in.
Oh, wow. Now, had she had a relationship with them before?
No, I was the introduction for her. So, basically, and then because Haunted Hospitals is one of the best-selling titles in that series of books of mine. But Haunted Hospitals and Tomes of Terror are 30% Canadian, all over Canada, 30% US, 30% rest of the world. And because it's a much larger market, Dundurn sells them well beyond Canada. That doesn't mean they don't sell the other ones outside of Canada, because somebody might have lived in Hamilton but now lives in Florida but still wants it. That's fine. But the majority of the sales are gonna be in Canada for those other books.
It's like I said before, it seemed like the stars really aligned for you in regards to, first the meetup, and then the process, and then you just seem to be bumping into people that were assisting you, and you then assisting them.
Worked
And
really well, yeah.
yeah, and we can expand a little bit more too in regards to your writing process. I did want to just chat about your book, The Creepy Capital.
Yeah.
And for those that aren't familiar, the capital that he's referring to is the city of Ottawa in the province of Ontario, Canada. And Ottawa is the capital of Canada. So that's where the Parliament buildings and the House of Commons are located. So
Yeah.
hence the creep factor, I guess. No, I'm just kidding.
And the alliteration, it was very important for me.
I think that comes through, Mark.
Yeah,
Just,
it's very
on a
clear.
few of those books anyways.
Yeah.
You have a portion in there that talks about the canals in Ottawa. What I found interesting, and you can expand about the canals, are they said to be haunted?
Yeah, and this was information I picked up on a couple of the ghost walks that go along the canals.
Mhm.
on both sides of the main street that cuts right in front of Chateau Laurier. And yeah, so there's so many immigrant workers building the canal died in the construction of the canal. Maybe they didn't have families or anything like that. Bodies may have been buried as they went along the way. And so the thought that there may be ghosts still wandering along the canal are there. And of course, because the Chateau Laurier is right beside the canal, there's more of an opportunity for ghosts. And of course, you got the Chateau Laurier right there, and then you got the museum across the canal as well that is haunted. And so, that the canal there itself has got to be pretty rife with spirits.
Wait a minute, let's back this up. Are you talking about in Quebec?
No. I'm talking about just across the canal, right on the side where the Parliament buildings are. This the Bytown Museum.
Oh, the Bytown Museum. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because you got to go down off the street into the canal area, and it's a beautiful walkway that goes all the way around the back of the Parliament buildings, like along the Ottawa River. Yeah, and there's a beautiful little Bytown Museum there.
Yeah, it was really nice. We used to live there, but I didn't realize about the little bit of ghost atmosphere that surrounds those canals, which makes sense because it was during the daytime. We had gone there for another visit after we had moved away, and I was walking there. You know how it goes underground? You have some of the highway, the road, whatever, and also the public bridge that goes on top. And I remember thinking, oh, there's something not right here. Like something just doesn't feel good here. I didn't bother researching, and I just thought, well, maybe it's just me, because I'm alone. But it was during the day, so yeah, that all makes sense now. Do you have a favorite from that series of books, Mark?
I think Spooky Sudbury is my favorite. Maybe because it's my hometown, and so a lot of the locations I knew most of my life.
Yeah.
And then as an adult, I got to write about them and celebrate them with the rest of the world. Maybe because the city and the people of the city have been so supportive, and I feel the love still to this day.
Wow.
With the media there. I mean, this was where, when we were launching the book, we had like a Chapters book launch and a Cole's book launch, and we sold out at both events. Jenny, we were both out of town at the time. Jenny had to leave, and I was there for the signing on the Sunday at Costco.
Okay.
And I thought it was going to be a drive-by signing. Like, I'll swing by and I'll sign some books and then I'll leave and drive back to Hamilton. I ended up staying 8 hours because I couldn't leave. And I got there and I brought Barnaby, my skeleton, who comes on tour with me.
Right.
Who I bought at Costco. And I'm there, and there's a big sign, and we're waiting to get in with my buddy in the morning who'd come up with the trip with me. And he goes, people are pointing at you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm carrying a skeleton. They go, no, they're saying that's Mark Leslie. There were people lining up because there were big signs that said, today featured Mark Leslie. Big signs with my picture and the picture of the Spooky Sudbury. Manager saw me with the skeleton and let me in early and said, oh my God, we're so excited. We've only ever had 2 other book signings here. Anne Murray and Gordie Howe.
Oh, Gordie Howe.
Hockey player. And I was like, okay, this is the royalty of Canadian celebrity, right? Anne Murray and Gordie Howe. And I was like, so I'm in really good company. And so they brought me over to this beautiful table that was decorated for Halloween, and it was right across from a skid. And so we had Stephen King's Dr. Sleep, one of the Uncle John bathroom readers, like the 2 skids, and then a skid of Spooky Sudbury. So I had to take a picture because I'm really close to Stephen King. So I took a picture and I was so excited. And then she said, oh, we're so happy. Can we get you a coffee or whatever? And I sat at the table. They opened the doors. I had lineups all day. I didn't leave till after 6 p.m. People would come and buy like 3 or 4 books. Oh, I want one for my cousin and one for my sister and one for my friend and one for, because it was Halloween time and they were buying for Christmas already. And then I took a picture of the skid at the end of the day, and my skid was already like down to 2/3 what it used to be. Stephen King's was still really high. So I jokingly, I took some pictures and I jokingly say I outsold Stephen King that day. I always tell authors when they're looking to promote themselves is define yourself as a big fish in a small pool. And so perhaps I feel like a big fish in Sudbury because the people make me feel special. They make me feel like a big fish. And so therefore, and Spooky Sudbury still is the best-selling one of my titles from Dundurn. And it's the smallest population, like 90,000 people.
Can you pull out anything from that book? Something that stands out from one of the stories? And what's going on in that city? That's so spooky.
Yeah, I mean, so you have the Haunted Bell Mansion, which is kind of an exciting place. You've got the Haunted Sudbury Theater Center, and then you have one of my favorites, which is the Haunted Level 1250 in
What's that?
Levack Mine. And this, I remember sitting with Hans Brosch, who was a retired miner who loved to go and talk to kids. And it's Haunted Level 2650. My apologies, of the Levack Mine. I found out about him from somebody that I knew, friend of the family that worked at the mine. I reached out to him. We met at Tim Hortons, and we sat there for 2 hours, and he just told me some amazing stories. Some of them were even ghost stories. He was just such an entertaining storyteller. But he shared the story, and he's also the author of Levack Mine 100 Years. So it was like 1912 to 2012. And just stories about the mine. And this is the town I grew up in, right? Levack, Ontario, just about 45 minutes north of Sudbury.
Okay.
And he tells a story about it was a weekend where there weren't a lot of people there. There's one guy who's he goes down the cage and he's just kind of patrolling around the mine. And then there's a couple guys up top. And this is back in the day when it would take a good 15 minutes for the cage to go down, 2,650 feet into the ground. Talked about the fire guard who's down there, and he was there, and in the dark when he was patrolling, he saw these bright red eyes glaring at him in the dark. He calls up to the cage operator and says, "Get me out of here now." And he says, "Why?" He's like, "There's something down here. I need out of here now." So think about the 15 minutes he had to wait for the cage to come and get him. And he said, "There's something down there. I'm never going back." And he never did. He still worked at the mine, but there's all kinds of other jobs that require not going down there. And he never did again. And Hans even explained, he said, okay, so there were timber, take timbers for building and constructing different elements of the mine, whether it was the rails or even just some of the walls that they would put up. That sometimes an animal like a raccoon or whatever will get into the timbers. And that's probably what he saw, glowing the light on his helmet. It's very possible that's what he saw. But he was convinced there was something down there, and the rumors still persist. New miners to this day are still told the story. Don't want to be on 2650 by yourself. Something down there. And so that was one of the ones that really stuck with me. The other thing about Sudbury that kind of caught me off guard is when Jenny Jellin and I were planning the book. We divided up, right? I'm going to do this, and you'll do this. You do this. You do this.
Okay.
So we have like a spreadsheet, and we decide how we're going to divide up the book. And I said, okay, I'll do the chapter on UFOs, and it ended up being 4 chapters on UFOs because I had to break it down into the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and on. Because there's so much UFO activity. And I remember when I was a kid in the early 70s, I was very young. I remember the lights in the sky and people freaking out because they saw weird stuff in the sky. And this was when the U.S. Air Force actually dispatched 3 fighter pilots from Colorado Springs, from the air base there, set up over Sudbury to intercept what they thought were 3 Russian spy craft in the air. And all of the documents about that encounter over Creighton Mine in Sudbury have all been redacted. So there's speculation as to, because what had happened is there were 2 different sightings of the lights from 2 different places that reported on their radar that there was something there. They might have thought it was a Russian invasion or whatever, so they sent air jets up to investigate.
Yeah.
And you're thinking about, I called it the scramble over Falcon Bridge, and it was a pretty big thing.
When you were young, do you remember that?
I seem
From
to
when you were young?
remember. I have this, and I can't remember if it was a dream or not. And my parents are deceased, so I can't remember. But I remember somebody going, "Oh my God, what's that?" And I remember running out of my bedroom and coming out the front door and looking up into the sky. And this was, I don't think this was that night, but it looked like it was something on fire, just lit up the entire sky. That looked like it was heading north over the house, and it just lit up the whole whatever. And that might have been a meteor, or I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
But that I have that memory from around that time in
From
the
around the
early
same time.
70s when I was like 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
This was around the same time that in the 70s, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, people were looking to the sky and seeing all kinds of things. So when I was researching the book,
Yeah.
I remembered, I had these memories of, oh yeah, I remember something about that.
Have you ever seen a UFO, Mark?
Well, just that, well, not that I know of, but just that time when that, whatever it was that was on fire, it was an unidentified falling object, maybe not a flying object, sort of other thing, but I've never saw anything that I couldn't say wasn't an airplane.
Right. Maybe we should head east, if you will, over to the next province. We'll saunter over to Quebec.
Yeah.
And I'd like for you to, I don't know, just sort of give a thumbnail sketch or a little bit more than that about an area that my father's parents grew up in when they came to Canada, and that's Griffintown.
Oh, yeah.
From
Mary
that area.
Gallagher, perhaps, is the most well-known. Mary Gallagher and her missing head from Griffintown is one of the ones that I'm sure that you've heard of. The regular appearance. So she was, she died in 1879, killed by her own best friend. She was a lady of the night, 38 years old. And according to the ghost walks that you can get from the awesome people, the haunted Montreal. It was like June 24th, 1879. She'd gone out with a friend and a fellow prostitute named Susan to celebrate Saint Jean Baptiste Day, which is a big holiday in Quebec. And the town is filled with music and festivities. And of course, it was perfect for picking up Johns. So it was good for business. They didn't find any male companions that night at the tavern, but they went on to Jacques Cartier Square, and they met a young man named Michael Flanagan. Spent the evening flirting, drinking, and of course Flanagan took a liking to Gallagher. They left together. They went to a flop house, and leaving Susan Kennedy by herself. And then 2 days later, Mary and Michael showed up at Susan's house. And this was a two-floor building, a tenement building, in the corner of William and Murray. Even though Kennedy's husband was upset, he stormed off. What happened was Jacob, the husband, was used to Gallagher dropping by at odd hours, but was furious she brought a man with her. He hadn't come to terms with his wife's profession, and he didn't want any dirty deeds taking place in the house. So he returned sometimes later, find all three of them drinking. His wife's alone in the room with Flanagan. Got into a little bit of a fight, and then this time, due to the drinking, he stormed off again. This is where it gets confusing about what happened next. Flanagan and Kennedy have conflicting reports, and they said that when he was questioned, he said he finished a bottle of whiskey with the two women, then he fell asleep by himself in the front room. He woke up later in the middle of the day, wanted to get drunk with Kennedy, but she declined. He got up to leave, and on the way out, saw Gallagher asleep in the other room. Everything seemed normal. There's no blood, nothing, and that's what happened, according to him. Her story was different. She said she followed Flanagan into the other room, and the two of them fell asleep side by side. She said she heard Gallagher invite another man in for a drink and also heard them arguing before she fell asleep again. She woke up, the man was gone, Gallagher was dead. Kennedy says she was horrified because she saw her friend's body. She fell to the ground, too weak to even call for the police. Flanagan woke up around the same time, saw the body and ran off. And then her husband returned home. So that was the story about her, and obviously she was beheaded. And now she allegedly appears on a regular basis. Some are saying that she may be searching for her head.
She had the 7-year itch.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's an interesting tale. And Griffintown itself it was such a beautiful neighborhood too. Yeah, I
You
think
mean now? Yeah.
first sighting of
Yeah.
her was in 1886. And her cloaked, headless figure was seen just wandering the streets. And then ever since June 27th is known as Mary Gallagher Day. So, I mean, and maybe some themes of some of the pubs and stuff like that too.
Yeah, apparently there's a lot of pubs there that are said to be haunted in Montreal.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you ever been over to, I don't know what it's called now, but it was Windmill Point.
No.
Just as a side note anyways, Mark, I'm sure you know that a lot of deaths occurred there in that area over there by Griffintown. And those boats and ships that came over were basically cargo ships. And they would like take the, like a merchant
Yeah.
ships, and take stuff to Europe, or if you will, England and Ireland. And then they weren't passenger ships, but they would take the people that were desperate, right?
Yeah.
To come over to North America. Got off, if they weren't already dead on the ship by the time they got there, they, crawled off the ship, and then I guess they had to make fever sheds for them. And I think that's where the fever sheds were on this Windmill Point back in 47. And they just buried thousands of bodies there.
I do remember
thousands.
that. I don't remember it being called Windmill Point, though. That was the...
maybe I'm wrong.
But again, this is one of the chapters that I think Shayna researched.
Okay.
And I do remember her talking about those people from the ships that were buried right there.
Yeah.
They're
still sort of desecrating that area even today. Area where a lot of people were buried, 3 coffins deep, if you will, and to make a highway for the Olympics. And then after that, it was the hydro, and other cities sort of sanctioned disturbances around what they called that black. They have a black rock site.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a commemorative site. They took a rock out of the water for all the people that had died during Black 47.
Yeah. So that's the interesting thing, is when you're doing research at the time, and it's kind of funny, and is so frustrating as a researcher, at the time of writing the book, sometimes you can't find what you need to fulfill a full chapter. So you hear about stuff and you go, yeah, that's a great anecdote, but I can't, it's not enough for a chapter. And then afterwards you go, oh man, where was this when I was writing the book? And it always happens. Someone shows up at the book signing and goes, I got a story for your book. I'm like, yeah, it was published 6 months ago. Or I mean, it's published now, but I mean, it was handed into the publisher 6 months ago. So where were you 6 months ago? It almost is kind of like, wow, is it time to do a second edition of Haunted Hamilton? Because I've got way more stories now that didn't make it into the book. And I did add some of them into haunted hospitals, right? Because I didn't have them when I was writing Haunted Hamilton. But during the book launch period of Haunted Hamilton, somebody approached me to tell me a haunted hospital story. It was like, oh man, I took all the notes. And then when I was writing Haunted Hospitals so many years later, I went, oh good, I can include that now. And then sometimes I know one of the Haunted Hospital stories came when I was on Coast to Coast AM radio with George Norrie. And this guy called in and shared a story about a haunted hospital in Calgary. And I was so terrified when he finished the story. I asked the producer, I said, would he be okay if I called him? I need to get that story for a book I'm working on.
Yeah.
And he was just so excited. Now I changed the name and everything like that. I anonymized him because he was working in a hospital and it was about a patient. So, you want to protect the innocent. But
you're like a collector of historical tales.
Yeah, but it's always so great when I can include them, because then I'll say, do you want to be named? And I mean, if you're an author of a book, great. I promote whatever it is that you're doing, which is whatever. And then, or do you want to be anonymous? Yeah, I'll make up a name.
Does your creative process, Mark, you mentioned Barnaby Jones, and that's your mascot skeleton.
Yeah,
Oh,
Barnaby Jones was the detective
Barnaby.
on
Oh yeah,
TV.
that was
Yeah,
it.
that's where
Barnaby
I
Bones.
was ripping
That's
off
where you
of
got it
Barnaby.
from. So you said that you got him was it at Costco's?
Initially,
Yeah.
I bought them at Costco. I mean, I bought probably 8 of them over the years because
Oh.
I take Barnaby with me. He sits in the front seat of my car in the passenger seat.
Mm-hmm.
Take him to book events, so people see me at a book signing. They see a
Mm-hmm.
guy with a skeleton. They know one of two things: avoid eye contact with the crazy bald guy, or they see the skeleton and go, "Oh my God, I bet you he writes my kind of book." Right. So
Sure.
the people who don't like me run the other direction. The
Mm-hmm.
people who are interested in what I have to say, they know what they're going to get. And it makes a great icebreaker because people will come up, they'll make jokes. Hey, that guy been sitting there long, or, whatever. Looks like your buddy could use a sandwich, some sort of icebreaker, right?
Right. Right.
I remember being pulled over on a ride program heading up to Sudbury. At 1 a.m, I was going up to launch Spooky Sudbury, and I had Barnaby in the passenger seat, seatbelt on and everything. I get pulled over, and the officer, rolled down the window. He says, shines the flashlight in the car, and he says, "Have you been drinking?" Obviously he's leaning in to smell my breath. I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Just coffee. I'm, going from Hamilton to Sudbury." He goes, "What about your buddy there?" Officer, alcohol goes right through him. and he goes, "Seriously, what's with the stiff?" "This is my pal Barnaby Bones. We're going up to Sudbury. I'm launching my new book. Officer, would you like a signed copy?" I reach into the back seat, grab a copy, and go, "I'll sign it for you." Sure, he has a story to tell about the crazy bald guy with the skeleton in his car.
And you're slowly reaching into the back just for a book. It's just for a book.
Yeah, like I'm reaching into the back for my gun. It was.
Not in Canada.
I never even thought of that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
But it was kind of a funny moment where he's like, "Why do you have a skeleton in your car? What's wrong with you?"
No, Barnaby has his own X or Twitter account. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
he does. He does have his own. He doesn't do much. Sometimes he'll post from when I go to events, and I was gonna jokingly post about Barnaby just feeling like I'm dragging him everywhere, and he's like, "Oh my God, again."
You mentioned that you've had a few of these mascots
Oh
or
yeah.
these How come?
Well, because the spine on them breaks so easily,
Oh.
and so tried to repair them and stuff like that. But I've got a little stand to stand them up. I usually put a T-shirt on them, and the other thing too, people like to take pictures with them, so I usually have a T-shirt with the book cover on it, or my website or
Yeah.
something. So it's distinctive. So you may as well, if you're going to post it to social media, I may as well get some marketing love out of it. And then we keep them because my partner and I, we do Halloween. We love Halloween. We do a big theme, and we use the skeletons to do a theme. So we started doing not just wood, like graveyards and stuff, but we started in 2020. We did a social distancing party where we had a dinner party with skeletons and a big table set up, and there were people but they were all separate from each other, but they were all kind of there, but the chairs were far away. We actually had severed feet, plastic severed feet, 6 of them, showing that they were 6 feet apart. And then we did the year after, I think we did Halloween. Not Halloween, we did Friday the 13th. So it was like a campsite, and Liz even built an outhouse. We had one of the skeletons was reading one of my books, and he was opening the door, looking out suspiciously, holding one of my books. And then just behind the outhouse, there was a skeleton with a Freddy mask or a Jason mask on. And then we had skeleton in the tent and stuff like that. And then last year we did Jaws, where I actually did a fake thing of water, where I had skeletons, like the top half of the skeleton popping out of the water as if they were playing volleyball in the water, and one's laying on the beach, and of course a lifeguard skeleton and a lifeguard. This year we're doing Carnival, which is going to be
You mean like Mardi Gras or
no, more
sorry.
of like a something wicked this way comes, sort of a fair that comes to town with the Ferris wheel and the fortune teller and all the rides and the games and stuff.
Yeah, okay.
So we probably have about 9 or 10 skeletons that we use to do these displays. And I always buy, usually like once every year or two, I buy a new Barnaby who's the fresh one, who hasn't missing a finger or anything broken off of him.
Yeah.
And he's with me on book tour. And then when something happens to him, I retire him and get a new Barnaby. I take him everywhere. I take them to places. They just wear out.
When you take them everywhere, are you talking like grocery shopping?
No, I would love to do that. Although it's kind of funny. I was at Hamilton the big super crawl. I was doing a book signing at Supercrawl a few years ago, prior to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how Supercrawl can get in Hamilton if you've ever been there. It's just the streets are packed and it's busy. And as I was coming back from the book event, I'm walking through a crowd, but Barnaby's beside me, and I'm holding him in the lower, like with my right hand, with my lower on a lower rib cage, just under his rib cage.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm walking him beside me as if he's walking. So if you're just looking at me through the crowd, you think there's a skeleton walking beside me. And it was so hilarious because of the heads that would just turn and go, what the heck is that?
You pretend like, well, I wonder what they're looking at.
Yeah,
You
and I
have
just
no
act
idea.
nonchalantly like I'm walking and talking with the skeleton, right? Like, yeah, I'm just acting like normal. Same thing when I drive in the car and people, see the skeleton sitting beside me. I just look at them like, what are you looking at? This is my buddy. Hey, don't make fun of him.
Continuing on, you touched a little bit on on the process of your writing.
Hmm.
Do you write like every day or night? And what's some of the methods of your information collection?
Okay, so process-wise, I try to write in the early morning hours. Get up around 5:30, feed the dogs and the cats, and put the coffee on, and then start writing. And then, I usually trying to wake up Liz by 7. We have her coffee on so she can go to work, and then I can get back to writing. And then I work later in the day. And the reason I write early in the morning is I'm easily distracted. I'm easily scared. I'm easily distracted. And early in the morning, if I don't look at email and I don't look at other things, I can focus. I can get things done. And so I'm most productive in those early morning hours when there's no one else around. It's also creepy, so it's inspiring when I'm writing scary stuff. Now, when it comes to writing fiction, I was working this morning on a horror story for a Canadian horror anthology. And that was just fun because I get to make stuff up, right? But I did have to do some research about various legends of creatures that that we use to make kids behave, because that's part of the legend I'm going with my story. So I did have to do research. But for the books in the research, I usually have a spreadsheet, Google Sheet, and especially if it's a co-author book, it's a lot easier because then we can share it.
Yeah.
Where we put the various subjects, we put links to places or books or newspaper articles or whatever it is, or people that we're going to interview for those chapters. We may collect documents of just notes of, notes from that I took after I read this chapter in the book or after I interviewed so-and-so. It could be an audio file from an interview. Could be a form that people fill out that I have on my website. And then we just kind of compile them and get a feel for how much we have. Is it worth writing a chapter on this or not? And then we decide that, okay, can I make this at least 1,000 words? If not 3,000, 5,000 words. And then the writing is the most fun part, to be quite honest, because all the research is done and you're just looking at the stuff and you're saying, okay, I've got to take these real things, this quote from someone, this element here, that element there, like multiple sources, and I've got to weave it together in a way that hopefully captures the imagination of the reader, brings them along for a ride, ideally with that same old conspiratorial, I live near a haunted hospital. Ooh, tell me more, right? You want to tell them something that has them lean in and say, okay, I'm with you. What's next? Where are you going to take me? And I try to write the chapters with that sort of, hey, we're just sitting around a campfire, I'm telling you the story. But I also try to write the chapters with a skeptic's perspective, because if I can find any way to explain the phenomenon using physics or science, I will. And the reason I do that is I want to ensure that I'm not trying to pull the wool over the reader's eyes. I want them to feel creeped out. I want them to feel eerie. And even when, I remember in Haunted Hamilton, there's one story about a haunted mansion up on the mountain. And I did the research and I realized that all the stories I had heard had to be made up. And oh boy, they came out around the same time that The Shining happened, and they're very similar to the events in that movie, where this story probably came from. It's all made up. The kids made up stories about the house, and you know how urban legends happen. And do it because I think there's more power if I'm willing to do that in a chapter where I can't find reason to explain away the ghosts or the goblins or the eeriness. That makes it a lot more real. Right? Because it's like, I'm looking, I'm trying. I'm a believer, but I'm not going to believe just completely without looking at the facts. And so I like to take that approach. Now I did, some of my developmental editors are like, oh, no, you don't want to take away the mystique. I was like, no, that's just part of my integrity. I want to be able to do that. I mean, even in one of them, the developmental editor said, Mark, you have a 6,000 word chapter about a haunted bookstore, and you went into the history of bookselling in America because the people who started the bookstore founded the American Booksellers Association.
Yeah.
And I thought it was cool, but my editor said, they're here for the ghosts. And I said, oh, come on, but I like that. So what they did is we cut that chapter down to 2,000 words, and they let me preserve those elements in sidebars for the book nerds like me. So
Okay.
that the true believer who just wanted the ghost didn't have to wade through all of the history I went into. And so that was kind of a fun concession where I said, yeah, okay, you're right. I went on a little too long, but could we still keep some of this? It was kind of a fun thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think that would be interesting too, because you get the basis of the, like a historical note.
Yeah.
Before you get into the meat and potatoes kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, I did have a brief note, but I went on for pages, and they're like, you only need a paragraph. You don't need to go on for 3. We cut some of those 3 pages into like bullet points in a sidebar, which was perfect. I mean, the people who don't care, they just skip over it, and the book nerds like, oh, that's so cool.
I'm thinking now that we're in a time that's what I think is similar to like the indie music, how that was for commercial record labels, this sort of do-it-yourself avenue for publishing. Can I get some of your thoughts about what it's like out there? Like, people seem to be using Amazon to self-publish. Don't know if that's a good thing or not a good thing. And of course, there's the AI writing tool.
Of course.
For a lot of people. I guess Amazon is a good target because they're probably the biggest.
They're the largest, yeah.
Right.
I think it's a fantastic thing. And I'll give you the perfect example. So you mentioned Two Macabre from Montreal. That was self-published. Our developmental editor at Dundurn, Shane and I did research, and we found a few stories, and then a couple of them were serial killer stories.
Mm.
And the editor said, oh, this is so disturbing. And this is supposed to be a book of ghost stories. And this just goes way off the rails. It's too dark. And I jokingly said, it's too macabre for Montreal, then, is what you're saying. Ha, ha, ha. We cut those 4 chapters from the book. And then I turned to Shayna and said, a Draft to Digital has a royalty share program where I could publish it through there. They'll pay you directly. Your share will pay mine. Why don't we do a mini book about 15,000 words with just the stories that we researched that were cut? And we published it. And because Shayna took the photo that was used on the cover, we used a different angle from the same photo shoot from Mount Royal Cemetery. And we self-published that one. I mean, I have leveraged self-publishing numerous times for various projects over the years. And I think when done properly, the best self in self-publishing is self-directed, because you still need an editor. Mm-hmm. You still need a cover designer. Like, you need to hire the right professionals. But it also allows you to bypass the gatekeepers that say, no, we already did a book like this. We're not going to do one. Right. So, for example, our editor at Dundurn said, no, these stories are too macabre. I'm like, yeah, but if somebody wants to read them, they can read them. So we called it Too Macabre. And the subtitle is called Tales Deemed Too Disturbing for Macabre Montreal.
Would you encourage people that would like to write, would you encourage them to use AI?
I use AI tools. I use Pro Writing Aid. Before I send my self-published manuscripts to an editor, I use Pro Writing Aid, which is AI-enabled grammar checker. Grammarly is a
grammar, sure, yeah.
Even built into Word, that's AI.
Yep,
that's
it is
helping you, right? And it's dumb. It doesn't know what you mean, so it's making really dumb guesses half the time. But it catches a lot of things in my writing that I do that are not good, that save me money, saves my editor time, and my editor frustration with me, because I can clean up some of those things that she doesn't have to fix.
Yeah.
So that's a great tool. I've also leveraged an AI tool in writing first drafts where I need to populate a scene with some random characters. And instead of spending 40 minutes researching and then populating, I can have it spit out, describe. And I did this in one particular writing session that I remember. And I just said, describe 5 people who'd be in a New York diner on a Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the morning. And it spit out. And I think it gave me, I used 3 of them, and then I readjusted the other 2. I used and I adapted it like a tool, just like someone might dictate their novel rather than write it by hand.
Sure.
Right. So
what
that
app was that, Mark?
it was a group of students from the University of Waterloo, and it was called Penspire. And they were writing it as a way to help with writer's block. And so it's kind of like for example, you have a character who's here in a story and they're walking on the street and you need to get them into the cafe and you're having trouble writing that bridge scene.
Yeah.
So you have the AI fill in the blanks. And then, now here's the thing that a real professional writer would do. If you use a tool like that, the AI is going to write really crappy, probably nonsensical stuff that will help you get from point A to point B. You're going to have to go back and fix that. You're going to have to clean that. You're going to have to write it.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen writers take AI and try to say, write a thriller for me. And it writes an outline for what a thriller could be. Sure. And they try to publish that as if it's a book. And they have no idea that that's not a book. It's an outline for a book. So you have an outline. Guess what? You can give that same outline to 20 different writers and get 20 different novels from the same outline.
Right. The AI is still learning.
Yeah.
Still learning.
So I think I see it as a tool that writers can use to help them, to help fill in some of the areas and gaps where they may be lacking. But it's a tool. They need to use it as a tool. They don't need to have it make them turn into a tool. And that's kind of the way that I looked at all technology. I look at ebooks as an opportunity for writers. I've looked at self-publishing as an opportunity for writers to reach niche audiences that no publisher will ever be able to reach. And I look at AI as a tool that writers can leverage with integrity and knowledge of how to write. I don't think for somebody who doesn't know how to write, because it'll be obvious when somebody reads. And let's be honest, ever since self-publishing, which kind of started to take hold in 2010, 2011, since self-publishing, the slush pile doesn't exist in the back room of a publisher anymore. The slush pile exists on a catalog, an online catalog of books that you can buy today. And it is the readers who decide what books are going to sell. Readers have always decided, no matter how it was published. There's going to be hiccups along the way, and there's going to be some really crappy things that get published. But I think it's going to help writers. And maybe it'll help that writer who has never been able to finish a book because of those little bridge scenes, and they just can't get it right. Yeah. And that AI helps them finish the first draft. And they finally finished it. Now that they finished the first draft, they can go back and edit it, and they can do a really good job.
Before we wrap up the conversation, I was going to ask if you have any words of wisdom for budding authors and or for someone interested in publishing.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I often tell writers that 3 of the traits that, and I've worked in the book industry for more than 30 years as a bookseller, writer, publisher even. 3 of the traits of the most successful writers are patience, practice, and persistence. Practice is to keep getting better at your craft, keep practicing, keep learning more about writing. I'm going to get my master's in publishing. I've worked in the industry for 30 years. I never stop learning about the craft and the business of writing. Practice, practice, practice. Think of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours.
That's where the 3 Ps are: practice, practice, practice.
Yeah. And then patience and persistence are, success doesn't happen overnight. It, when you're submitting to publishers, it takes 13 submissions for every acceptance. You gotta develop a thick skin. And if you're self-published, well, the rejection comes in the fact that nobody buys your book, or you get a 1-star review, or whatever that case may be. One of my books that I first published in 2016 took me 10 years to write and publish. And I didn't. So I did okay, moderately, when it was released in 2016. But in 2020, when I revised the cover,
Yeah.
and I started to write I turned that into a series. I sold more books in the first 6 months of 2020 than I sold in the previous 4 years.
Was it the cover, Mark?
It was the cover and the fact that I was writing book 2 and book 3 in the series.
Like a
So it was a couple
thumbnail.
of things. The cover was wrong. I had the wrong cover. I made mistakes. I've made lots of mistakes over the
Sure.
years.
Yeah.
I can't beat yourself up. You're going to make mistakes. You learn, you grow.
Yeah.
And I
That's it.
realized I was pitching it to the wrong audience based on the cover. I found a great cover designer. He not only designed that book for me, he's done every single book in the rest of the series, and book 7's coming out in March of next year.
Where does somebody find a cover designer?
You can find them online, Reedsy, and Reedsy.com is one of the platforms you can find professional cover designers. This gentleman that I found him through 99 Designs originally. So 99designs.com, I used them to find a few cover designers. And then I found this one guy and used him for a friend of mine. We did a whole bunch of covers. They're like, hey, we'll hire you to do 5 covers. And he only charges $150 US, which is amazing for a front cover, and $250 for a cover flat. And Juan Pedron has done, oh my God, he's done probably 12 or 15 book covers for me since then.
We're going to circle back. That makes me think of the AI programs that are out there now for art, from speech to creation. You let them know exactly sort of what you're thinking of, and voila.
Possibly, although there's issues with AI generated art. So, and I know Juan uses stock image sites like most publishers do, and he combines elements. So he hasn't yet done that. Now, I've used AI voice, by the way, to make a book more accessible. I had one of my books for writers called Wide for the Win, which is like publishing your books wide, rather than just being exclusive to Amazon, which is a movement in the indie author space. And I had someone reach out who said, is this available in audio? And I said, well, not yet, because it's going to take me 80 hours to record it, because it's 400 pages. And he said, well, I'm blind. I can't read it. And I said, hey, you okay with AI? And he goes, yeah, a digital narrated book. So I went to Google Play. And they have a free AI audio generator from your EPUB. I had an audiobook for him. And so suddenly this book, which wasn't accessible, somebody could not read it, suddenly could read it. Some books, ideally, I do pay narrators, professional narrators for my audiobooks. Like my Canadian Werewolf series has Scott Overton's my main narrator. Sarah Sempino does the female voice in some of the books where there's the female perspective. Gail, the other main character. There's a version where Julie Strauss and I, because Sarah was on her honeymoon, the audiobook wasn't going to come out for several months. So we did a read by the author version. And the read by the author version is $4.99. And the one with the professional narrators is $14.99. If you want the professionals, you're going to have to pay for it. I'd also love to have an AI version. That's 99 cents. Make it affordable for some people. Like, I can't afford $15. Well, can you afford $1? Right? Like, so I'm a big fan of accessibility and people being able, if they want to read a book, let them, somehow. Now, all my books are available through the library too, so everyone can read and access my books for free.
Yes, people, remember that word, library.
Oh my God, libraries are oh my God, they are the best.
Mark, would you like to leave your web address and any other contact information, which I'll also leave on my webpage at Orbicle Times? Okay.
You can find out anything you want about me and stuff you probably don't want to know about me over at markleslie.ca.
Thank you, Mark, for making space for this interview and for your contribution to this cast. It was the perfect spooky sampling for the Halloween season, so I very much appreciate you, Mark. Thank you. And
thank you so much, Kelly Jo.
Yeah. Okay. So glad that you could make it, Mark. Well, take care, and I hope you enjoy, although it's a few days from now, Thanksgiving, if you partake and celebrate.
Yeah. You too.
Yeah, thanks very much. I do. I will. Okay, you too. Bye-bye, Mark. I would like to keep this cast a commercial-free zone. In light of that, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channels. All my orb videos are available by using the handle @Spirit Orbs Sightings, or visit my new channel with the handle @Orbicle Times Podcast. If you've already subscribed, many thanks. For blogs, episodes, show notes, bios, images, and video, please visit www.orbicletimes.com. If you enjoyed an episode, then please give a like or a share on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, or whatever podcatcher you happen to use. If you've already done so, much appreciated. Thank you for taking your time to visit these Orbicle Times. Orbicle Times Podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kelly Jo, at Studio Spare Room.